welcome to this edition of Meet the Leader, brought to you by the Uongozi Institute. I'm your host, Gwamaka Kifukwe. On this edition of the program, we're honored to be joined by His Excellency Ernest Koroma, the former President of the Republic of Sierra Leone from 2007 to 2018. Your Excellency, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So when you look back at your political leadership journey, where did it all kind of begin for you?
I will say, in essence, it started when, in 1977, President Stevens, of blessed memory, called a snap election. By then, I was teaching in one of the senior secondary schools in my home, in Makeni, and by which time I have made an impression on my teacher colleagues within the township, the pupils in school, and not only in the school I was teaching, but all of the schools, because I was reaching out to most of them. And I've also made an impression in the minds of the members of the community. When this election was called, they urged me to kind of contest. At that time, I was just coming from the university, a young man. But of course, they galvanized quickly. And it was a constituency that I was going to win if the party symbol was given to me. But then the party and the president then had their plans. They wanted to continue with the incumbent. There was clear support in terms of populace out there for me. But when the president decided that the party ticket should be given to the incumbent, who was much older, he invited me. And at the time, he was like predicting the future. He said, "Young man, you have a future in politics. I see great things ahead of you, but you have to build your capacity. You have to ensure that you are from the university. You have to learn from the universe." And I accepted it in good faith. And then I decided to move on. But I immediately left the teaching profession. I went to the private sector and the insurance industry to develop a career. And then but from that point, I had established a base in my hometown, and I come from a political family. And I knew then that it was just a matter of time. Even whilst I was in the private sector and the insurance industry, I have at some point, to shift.
So you always knew, in a way, that at some point you would return to politics at the national stage. And then this journey then that takes you from the teacher into the private sector and then eventually to president, what were some of the key moments along the way, both successes and failure, that really had shaped your leadership, have shaped you as a leader and your perception of leadership? Are there kind of maybe a few moments that you look at and say, here I learned something that has stayed with me, or here I learned something I maybe shouldn't do, that kind of thing?
Well, it has been a long journey for me, because I was in the private sector for a period of 25 getting to 30 years. And I was observing what was happening in the political sphere. But then the country ran into a civil war. We had 11 years of civil war, very devastating war. It was a senseless war. It was just a war of people asking for things that were not achievable, and other people using the young people, the more radiant rebels, to achieve their political aims. So it was senseless in the end. Nothing was achieved. But it was very devastating for the country, devastating for our people. And at the end of the war was declared over in 2002. But during the period of the war, it was dawned on me that something has to be done. You have to take some steps. You either put up with all of what is going on, or if you have to effect a change, you have to come in and be active in the process. Initially, my intention was not to become leader of the party. I was focused on just reorganizing the party, because our party was in governance until 1992, when it was overthrown by the military. And then it was a year earlier the war started. And throughout that period of the military junta and some part of President Kaba's period of office, we had a war. I looked at what happened, the devastation, the destruction, and the kinds of things that Sierra Leoneans do not really deserve happened to all of us. And even in the private sector, things almost were at a standstill. So that was the moment, after consultations and hard thinking, we decided that we have to go into politics. Like I said, initially it was just supporting the party to come back into governance. But in the process of this engagement, I think the peers and comrades in the party called upon me to take over the leadership and become the flag bearer. And that was how the final decision was taken for me, not only to be in politics, but also to go in for the leadership of the party. And of course, when the party machinery, through a convention and other processes, decided on it, I was elected as a flag bearer of the party in the 2002 elections. It was the election I lost to President Jan Kaba. He was then the incumbent. No, but incidentally, it was in 2002 the war was declared over. But then I lost, and I continued as a leader of the opposition in parliament until 2007, when I contested again. And this time round, I won the elections and I was elected president.
And that experience of taking on these political leadership positions, I mean, were they what you had expected, or were there some surprises for you that, you know, met you as you've reached that kind of stage? Were there some things that even at that point, with your career, with all your experiences, with everything that you and the country had been through, were there still some surprises for you as a leader?
Well, starting politics then, there were surprises and also meeting expectations. On the side of meeting our expectations, I was happy that we went out to canvass the support of the people, which we achieved, and we made promises that will effect changes in the country, and to a great extent we achieved that. I became president just 5 years after the end of the Civil War, and the focus then was for us to continue to consolidate the peace. You know, peace building is quite a difficult process, and it's not a process that is accidental. You have to really put your effort and time into it. So what we achieved in terms of peace building, to me, was something that we set out to do, so it was expected. And we are very proud that at the end of the period of office, we did not only consolidate the peace, but we were recorded as the most peaceful country within the sub-region and the third most peaceful country in Africa. So that was an achievement. I came into governance at a time when we had the UN peacekeeping mission still supporting us in our efforts to consolidate the peace. We worked on it. We did not only transform ourselves from a country that was supported by the UN to maintain their peace, but we graduated to the new position of exporting our people, our military guys, to go out,
teach other countries,
and support other countries to build the peace, maintain the peace, and try to sustain it. So it was a transformation in itself. And we also made successes in the areas of reforming the country, to the extent that by the end of my first term in 2012, the World Bank recorded us as belonging to the League of Nations that the most reformed, 10 of the most reformed countries. And we made substantial achievements in the areas of infrastructural development. We rolled out a huge infrastructural program in the country, in road infrastructure, energy, social services. We built a lot of hospitals, schools, and we introduced a free healthcare program. We started introducing free education at some point. And to me, these were all goals that were expected. And I am sure that we made a lot of achievement and progress. Now, by 2013, our GDP was projected at 13.5. And
we the GDP growth rate this
yes,
year.
We were making a steady progress until we had Ebola. Before Ebola, our country was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So we were really positioned to achieve the kind of difference that we set out to make in the country. But of course, just by the second quarter of 2014, we were struck by Ebola. And then we had this collapse in the prices of iron ore, and that devastated our economy from a growth rate of 13. We went on to 20 in 2012, but 13 was projected in 2013. By 2014, the first quarter, when we had this outbreak of Ebola, I mean, the whole thing collapsed to -20. This was the kind of devastation that really spelled on us. But in terms of the achievements, I will say that we achieved a lot, and that was expected. On the other side of what was not expected, I came into politics from the private sector with an open mind and believing that the norm in the private sector is what you should expect in business, in politics. But so I was, even from within the party, there were too many challenges for me to even continue as a leader of the party. There are a lot of intrigues, political intrigues. The politics is a different topography from business, and there's a lot of things that are expected of you, especially in the context of the African situation, where you have to deal with party loyalties, you have to deal with party heavyweights, you have to deal with regional balance, tribal balance, inclusiveness to ensure that you maintain an even keel. These are all challenging issues, but these are issues that you have to handle to ensure that everybody stays relevant in the boat that you are the captain of. So these are the kinds of not too pleasant experiences that you have to cope with, but which as a political leader you have to ensure that you manage properly, otherwise you will not achieve the end results. At the end result, you want a united party, you want a united country, you want to achieve the goals you set yourself, you want to ensure that the deadlines are met, the vision is, you remain focused on it, and the goals, everybody is geared towards aligning the goals to achieve the vision that you set. So these are the issues that were not expected, but with time, I will say that now nothing surprises me in politics.
So just to unpack two things you said then, maybe to start first with, you've come out of the private sector. Is leadership different in politics and the private sector? Because we do sometimes hear people say leadership is leadership regardless. There's certain principles.
Well,
so just to unpack that a little bit.
Leadership is leadership.
However.
But the reality is that things are much more predictable in the private sector than in politics. Yes, as a leader, you have to set your goals. I mean, you have to have a clear vision. You set your goals, you pick your team, you provide the leadership, you take tough decisions. But in the private sector, when that is achieved, everybody knows that you have to toe the line. There are no other considerations. In politics, there are issues that have, like I mentioned, you have to try to maintain certain balances.
You mentioned with the balances of all these considerations.
Regional balance, religious balance, ethnic balances. And you also have to deal with your internal party politics. Heavyweights in the party will make some demands, some of which will be unnecessary demand, some can be a justifiable demand. And you also have to deal with the opposition. Of course, in business, you have your competition. But when the competitors go out there and say things, these things can be verified. The customer will be able to verify immediately. I mean, if you say my drink is better than yours, leave it to the customer. He will verify. But in politics, there's a lot of propaganda. Things that cannot easily be verified. You now have things about fake news. You have the social media that is now coming in with a new dimension in politics. So this makes a difference between the politics and the private sector. To the extent that I always tell people that in the private sector, when we say 1 + 1, it's 2. But in politics, we say 1 + 1. Today it's 2, 3. Tomorrow it's -1, and the other day is. So there are variations, and these are things that are coming from the effects of the environment in which you operate, the kind of political leadership you are,
the history you've gone through, and so on.
So it varies really. The reality is that there are differences.
And the other thing, just to unpack a little bit, if you may, you mentioned some of these other balances that are very specific, but there's also a sense that leadership is leadership anywhere in the world. And I get a sense that, at least you believe, or maybe it's my interpretation, that leadership somehow in Africa is different from other parts of the world. And maybe it's unique to Africa, or different regions have their own local context in which makes leadership different. What's your view on this kind of sentiment?
Well, I will say that leadership is leadership. You have to provide leadership. You have to provide the hope. You have to be of service to the people. But then the environment makes a world of a difference. In developed countries that have democracies, you have institutions that are strong, institutions that are independent and that can do things on their own, institutions whose definition is not determined by even the leader of the institution. That makes a difference. In Africa, we are still evolving, we are developing. We have come a long way, no doubt. We are building our democracies, we are building our institutions, but we still have weaknesses, institutional weaknesses. We still have a lot of patronage here and there. We still have situations wherein the presidency is still the all-powerful institution in the country. Our people, with the greatest respect, not being disrespectful, we still have issues of getting that level of education to understand the issues, to know our responsibilities and our limitations, and to get out of certain influences. It could be a regional influence, it could be a tribal influence, it could be maybe just a personal relationship you've developed with somebody in school or somewhere. These are the extras that still influence or cause difficulties for the leader in Africa. So even where you believe you have worked hard you have served the people. Come an election, they might not vote for you. They will vote for another party. They will vote for somebody else because, I mean, he's our brother. I have to vote for him. Yes, you have constructed our roads, you've built our hospitals, you've done that, but hey, this guy is, you know. So that gives a kind of a new complexion in the leadership in politics in Africa, as is, you know. I mean, in other countries where you have other systems of government, it's different. But in democracy, which we are all now trying to practice, it's still a challenge because of this individual kind of commitments. We still have the kind of tribal tendencies. People still hold on to personal views and opinions, we still don't have that level of education all round for people to look at things out of just these limited confines they find themselves.
So we spent quite a bit of time, you know, reflecting on your views on leadership and your history of leadership and so on. But you've recently left office. You know, what's next for you? Where will you now apply your leadership wisdom and experience? And you know, what do you have, if you can share with us?
Well, it's retirement for me now. It has been 11 years of challenging moments, and but I will spend my time working on building on peace within the country, peace in the sub-region, and peace in Africa, because I believe that is fundamental. Without peace, nothing will happen. No development will take place. There has to be peace. I will spend some of my time on doing that. I also believe that we have the challenge of addressing the human factor in Africa. Our advantage is that we have a youthful population. Our challenge is to transform that to a kind of a productive population that will realize their potential and also will help Africa to realize its potential. So things that have to do with youth development, youth empowerment, will be issues I will be interested in. Another issue is the women's empowerment. The women are majority in our populations everywhere, but they've also demonstrated a lot of commitment and productivity in all spheres of our activities, even from the village, the farm, the village community, right on to the top. When I was serving as president, the women that won, that distinguished themselves in the organizations, I mean, most of the people that came out as top are women. So you can see it happening everywhere. What it tells us is that we have to give more support to women to ensure that we continue to realize the benefits and enhance the development. So these issues of peace, the youth, the women, and environmental issues issues of the future are issues that are fundamental to the development of Africa. And that is why, with whatever time that is left of me, I'll be looking and working on those issues. Fortunately, I've retired after serving as a two-term president. I still have some energy.
Fortunate that you do.
I will look into these issues, and whatever I can do within the country, out of the country, in the sub-region and Africa, I look forward to doing that.
And just as a final question to wrap up the interview, and as you reflect on everything you've been through and your aspirations going forward, what advice and what thoughts do you have for, other aspiring leaders, whether young or not, but aspiring leaders on the continent? What kind of key message do you wish is taken from your leadership journey and your leadership experience that you hope to pass on to the next generation of leaders?
Well, I will say that you have to be prepared for leadership in Africa. The expectations out there can only be achieved by a person that is larger than life. So you have to ensure that you're prepared psychologically for it, and with the changes that are taking place in Africa, we have to work on dialogue. We have to stay engaged. Leadership is about serving the people. It's not about lording over them. It's serving the people, giving them hope, providing a better life for them, making them relevant, and working together to them to transform the circumstances of your communities and Africa. It requires a lot, and just mere campaign statements, opposition statements. When you're in the opposition, it's easy to make promises that within a given time, X, Y, Z will be achieved. But when the town is cast, you're there, and you realize the limitations of resources, the limitations not only of financial resources, but also of human resources, and the time frame you have to achieve the world that you have promised to achieve, and it becomes a very difficult matter. I will say that we make less promises and live with the realities of the moment. Less propaganda, and be very practical in our approach. People will appreciate you when you come, when you're forthright, you're honest, they see you make a lot of effort. Even with certain difficulties, they will understand. But if you promise the world and you cannot even provide a glass of water, then it becomes very serious. So for leaders coming up, I think we have to know that running our nations and for people to entrust their lives in our hands, it's a serious business. And we must give it the seriousness that it deserves.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for joining us on the program, and we hope to have you back another time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anytime.